And welcome and Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
And thank you. And the Parsha, in fact, that we are going to study, and next week's Parsha are two of the most arcane Parshiot in the entire Torah. And they deal with something called Tzara'at. This is an affliction that is translated as leprosy. It is not clinical leprosy. Maybe we'll just call it Tzara'at and leave it at that. This is clearly a skin affliction. Leprosy is far more pervasive and awful than this particular thing. This is not good, but it doesn't talk about limbs falling off and losing your toes and things like that. It is not that kind of disease, not the one in the Torah. And it seems to be more like psoriasis than anything else, but it's definitely the sort of superficial on your skin kind of thing. So it does include your hair falling out. That does happen, although in this case, we're talking about the hair color on your skin changing color, that if it develops a white color, then it's possible that it is Tzara'at. And here we are talking about a spiritual uncleanliness, a very high level of spiritual impurity. And as Rashi, I believe, says at the beginning of this Parsha, because the Torah went in at the end of last Parsha of Shmini, went into the discussion of purity and impurity of animals and contact with them. It started with animals, and now it's dealing with human beings. And this week's Parsha essentially deals with the diagnosis of it, the description of the diagnosis of it. And next week's Parsha deals with the process by which the person, the Metzora, the person who has contracted this disease, is able to re-enter the camp, the process by which they are able to regain entrance into the camp. So again, it goes into really, as I said, very arcane issues. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. And we are into this parsha. So you can see this is Shishi. Normally, this parsha, Tazri'ah and Metzora, in a regular year are combined over the Shabbat. So that would make it, if they were combined, this would be the beginning of the third Aliyah. But when it's just by itself, which it is this particular year, this is already the sixth Aliyah. So we are moving in, since there's seven Aliyot, we've really moved into this, well into this particular parsha. And I would refer you to earlier sessions that you can find on the YouTube page of this if you're interested. So, going on. The ish ki maret rosho, if a man loses the hair on his head, kereahu, he is considered simply bald. Tahorhu, he is in fact pure. This is not a case of leprosy. So here we go. Kereahu tahorhu, tahor mitum'at nitakin. So there is a disease that the Torah has described as a netek. I think that's translated as a fret, which does involve the hair and the discoloration of the hair. And Rashi is saying, this is not one of those various types of nitakin, of netek. She'eino nadun v'simanei rosh v'zakan. This is not diagnosed with those indications of the head or the beard. Shehem makom sa'ar, which are in fact the location where hair is found. Ela b'simanei nig'e or, but this would be this, okay. They are not judged. Let's make sure. Okay, this is not going to be judged by this particular area, but by the indications of nig'eor, where niga'im are plagues, literally, in other words, the plague of leprosy. So the indications of skin, basar, right, the flesh, basar lavan, right. So this would be another way in which it is. This is if the hair turns white, umichye ufishyon. So a michye, I believe, is some kind of rawness to the skin. Pishyon sounds like it would be some kind of eruption. Those are indications of leprosy. The removal of his hair is not considered leprosy. So Rashi's telling us that the indications of leprosy are excluded from this particular diagnosis. I mean, if he saw any of these things, if the priest, and just to review that in order to get diagnosed, the diagnosis is done by a Kohen, by a priest. It is not done by anyone else. This is totally part of what makes this a spiritual disease. So, now, so here we go. Now, if there is in this bald spot, sorry, I think I left out a sentence. Here we go. Sorry, 41, right? Ve'im mipa'at panav, and if from the front of his, literally it means his face, but it means the front of his head, yimaret rosho, again we're talking about the hair from his head falls out, gibeahu. So there's a separate word. I don't think there's a word in English that I know of to directly translate this word gibeach. Gibeach means front head baldness. So we only have the word bald in Hebrew, but we don't have, so we got kereach, which would be all the hair of a person's head, or that process. Gibeach is if the front of his head he's losing hair on the front of his head, he's considered a gibeach. Tahorhu, and once again, he's considered to be in a state of purity. So here, im mepa'at panav, right? Mi shipua kod. So shipua would be a slanting air of the skull, klape panav, towards his face. Karui gabachat. This area, if the hair falls out of this area, it's called your gabachat, or rather that area of your head where the hair is. For af hatztain, and he says, in fact, this also would include the sides of the head. Shemikan umikan, which are one side and the other, bichlal, are included in this. Umishipua kod klape achorav karui karachat. So he's defining for us these words of gabachat and karachat, and he's saying, and from the slant of the head, right, of the skull, klape acharav, towards his back, right, towards the nape of the neck, if that area has the or even let's forget about removal. Okay, I think he is simply saying that part of the head is called the karachat, right? And the part of the head that slopes towards the front of the head and the sides is called the gabachat. And so if you're a kereach, it means you've lost the hair on that part of your head. And if you're a gibeach, you've lost the hair on that part of your head. So Rashi simply saying that these words gabachat and karachat actually have to do with the area of the head we're trying to describe. Okay. So now we go on. V'chi hiyeh bakarachat or bagabachats, right? So it's important that he's just defined those terms. He says, and if there is in the front in the area of the skull, which is to the hair that is going towards the back of the head, right? Or bagabachat, or towards the front of the head, nega lavan, a white affliction. Adom dom. pinkish, right? Reddish. Tzara'at porachati. That would be a malignant tzara'at. Bekarachto, in his karachat, in other words, in that area of the head, or vegabachto, or in that area towards the front of the head. So it could be that he is bald, but there is those signs in the skin. But if I'm understanding Rashi correctly, it could also have to do with the hair, the color of the hair. So it's possible to get leprosy there, but having the hair just simply fall out is not considered a sign of tumah. It's not a sign of impurity. However, the Torah has just defined those signs of purity that it can occur in that part of the head. Okay. Nega lavan, a white affliction. Adamdam, and I said that's sort of reddish. So now I have a word that I can't make out. Because this is not this. It's the way it's spelled is petoch, but let's see something. Whether he is saying, I'm trying to see if this is in this. Okay, I will have to look that up. Right. Minayin sha'ar marot. So let me keep going. Because I'm trying to see if there is a word. I don't recognize this word, I must tell you. So unless it's a misspelling or something. Minayin she'ar hamarot, and he says, how about the other marot is referring to the indications of leprosy. In other words, what if there are other kinds of indications that are mentioned elsewhere in describing the diagnosis of leprosy. Talmud Lomar. So for this reason, Scripture says Kemar'e Tzara'at or Basar. It says, here we go. Here it is, Kemar'e Tzara'at or Basar. Right, like the appearance of leprosy in the flesh or on the skin of the flesh. So that's why the Torah says here to include, right, other indications of leprosy, right? So in other words, Kemar'eh Hatzarat, in other words, he's reinterpreting these words here or spelling them out, like the appearance of leprosy, ha'amur, that is stated, the Parshat or Basar, in the section that is dealing with the skin of the flesh, which isn't talking about the head and the hair on top of the head. Adam, here is what it says, Adam kihiyeh ba'or basaro, an individual who has in the skin of his flesh umahu amur bo, okay, and that which is stated regarding it, shemitame be'arba marot, that is diagnosed as impure by means of 4 different indications. V'nadun b'shtei shavuot, and again, the process began where the man showing these indications would go to see the priest, and it was possible that the priest thought that it might be that, but he had to then go into isolation for a week, and then he had to show it to the priest again. And it's possible that if it had not developed any further, the priest would then have him isolate for another week to see. And then, if my recollection is correct, if it hadn't then developed any further, it still would be considered leprosy or tzara'at, forgive me. And of course, if it had developed, then without any question. But of course, if it had started to fade away, then he might be considered in a process of tahor. V'lo kemar'eh tzara'at ha'amur, and he says, as opposed to the indication of tzara'at that is stated bishchin, Shchin is like a boil, or michya is a burn, shehu nidon b'shavua echad, which is diagnosed in the course of 1 week, v'lo kamarme nitakim, and this doesn't look like the indications, right, of a netek, something called a netek. This is, as I said, I believe it's translated as a fret, and I'm not sure if we're talking about things that look like freckles or something like that. Shel makom sa'ar, like the place of where the hair is. She'ein mitanin ba'arba marot, which are not considered to be impure by means of 4 indications. Sa'et v'toldata, the sa'et would be an eruption and its derivatives. Baheret would be a bright spot, v'toldata, and its derivatives, which have to do with the coloration. So apparently, let me think that in this case, all right, that we're simply saying a netek might well be impure, but it has different ways of being diagnosed. That's the point that's being made here. Okay. So let's go on here, right? V'gra'a oto hakohen, and the priest should examine him, right? Should see him literally. V'hinei se'et hanega levana, and behold, the eruption of the nega, of the affliction, levana adamdemet, is white and reddish, the karachto, in the area towards the back of his head, or begabachto, or in the front of his head, kamar'et tzara'at or basar, right? It looks just like the tzara'at in the flesh, right? Okay. Ish tzarua hu, he is considered to be a tzarua, meaning having tzara'at. Tameh hu, he is impure. Tameh yitma'enu hakohen, the priest should declare him impure, berosho, in his head, berosho nigor. So his affliction is in his head, is on his head. Berosho, Rashi, berosho, on his head. Nigor is his affliction. Ein li ela nitakim. So he says, normally all I could derive would be this affliction called a netek, min ayin l'rabot sha'ar hamenugaim. He says, how do I know that in this particular diagnosis we include other kinds of those who are afflicted by this? Talmud lomar, for this reason Scripture states, Tameh nit amenu, right? He shall indeed declare him impure, lerabot et kulam. That is to include any other kinds of similar indications. Al kulam, regarding all of them. Hu omer, he says, the gadav yiyu krumim. This is what happens once a person is in fact declared a leper, that they have to basically rumple his clothes. His clothes become disheveled. He needs to wear disheveled looking clothing, right? And etc. for Gomer. Going on. So now we are going to say, this is what happens. V'hat tzarua, and a one who has tzara'at, asher bo hanega, right? Who has been diagnosed with this particular affliction. Begadav yiyu fomim, his clothing should be, as I said, basically disheveled. The rosho yeh parua, and this has to do with the hair on his head is just a mess. He has a permanent bad hair situation. For al safam ya'ateh, and apparently he needs to place something over his mouth, right over over the top of his mouth, the tameh yikra, and he has to call out, unclean, unclean. Right. So Rashi, before I comment a little bit further on this, because this is, as I said, arcane and difficult. This is not easy stuff. So Rashi explains, Rumim ru'im means torn. Parua, it refers to the hair just is let to grow. His hair just grows. He never gets a haircut. Va'al samfam ya'ateh, and he has to place like some kind of covering over his mouth, right? Ka'avel, like one who's in mourning. Safam, right? So he says, what's the safam? So he says, sa'ar asfatayim. We're talking about the hair over the lips, your mustache. And the French, of course, is grinon, it looks like. And in Yiddish, it looks like schnorbert. So bert is a beard, right? You can see the relationship to the word beard in English. So schnorbert must mean to do that part of the mouth, the mustache, etc., the las. The tameh yikra, and he shall call out, unclean, unclean. Mashmiya, right? He has to announce shehu tameh, that he is in a state of impurity, vayifreshu mimenu, so that people should dissociate from him. They should stay away from him. And that's okay. So let me comment a little bit. So as we've said in previous discussions about this, is that the rabbis had determined that this particular affliction was the consequences of bad mouthing. That going, so in other words, that the what we do when we go around and speak disparagingly about other people is a terrible, terrible thing. And of course, it's something that a lot of people engage in. Most of us wind up doing some kind of bad mouthing or another in various situations. And bad mouthing basically is done in secret. And what you're doing basically, of course, is you're making someone a leper in a way towards his friends or associates when you badmouth an individual. And because it's such a common kind of thing, and it's seen as such a, I think would it be venial, would be that the right term for this? That it's not considered that big a deal, that the Torah is trying to come around, again, the theme of doing what doesn't come naturally, to try and emphasize how we have to stay away from that kind of behavior. And this awful consequence, as we're reading about right now, is to reverse exactly that. In other words, you've secretly made someone else a leper, and God is saying, well, you're not going to be able to be secret about it. Your own spiritual condition is now going to be for public review. And just as when you do this to another person, you kind of push them out of a community, right? You are going to have to go through that yourself. And that's the way you're going to make atonement for this. And there is certainly indication in the Torah itself for this, and the idea of us being very mindful and very concerned about speaking ill about other people. There was a very great rabbi of the 18th century, I believe, who was, I can't think of his real name right now, but he was referred to as the Chofetz Chaim, because there's a verse in one of the Psalms that says, who is one who desires life? Chafetz Chaim is desiring life. And it says, guard your tongue from evil. So this is evil speech that we're talking about here. And this particular rabbi wrote many pieces. He absolutely devoted his life to trying to make people aware of the evils of evil speech. and that's why he was known as the Chofetz Chaim. He also actually composed a work, the Torah, which is a major halachic work in terms of determining halacha for Ashkenazic Jews. You can't just use the Shulchan Aruch, which is considered to be, of course, the law book of Jewish law for Ashkenazic Jews, but he actually did a tremendous amount of research and wrote his commentary and his discussion of this, a major work. You ask how someone is capable of putting out so much work, and it's called the Torah Tmima, and it is in print. And with this, I will stop today's lesson. And of course, if you have a let me make sure if this is where we're up to. Yes. Okay, so we're onto this page. And that's where we'll continue next time we meet. Any comments? Any thoughts before I switch off the recording? Okay. All right. I'll stop the recording.